Hello and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of art and popular cinema from the then and now. We are your hosts, me, Tomás Ferreira, Leonardo Miranda,
Hello.
and Miguel Aido.
Hi there.
This is our talk show segment where we welcome grand indie filmmakers to our wonderful couch and discuss their work. Lesley Loksi Chan is a Canadian filmmaker and multidisciplinary artist with a BA in anthropology and women's studies and a BFA in film and video production. Her works have been screened at international festivals. Shaped by the histories of anthropology and cinema, her films explore how material culture and image culture affect the particular ways we think, remember, and live together, using experimental, handmade, and process-based filmmaking to create moving images as mementos. Her latest is a short documentary entitled Lloyd Wong Unfinished, a recovery of Chinese-Canadian artist Lloyd Wong's video work about his experience living with HIV. It remained unfinished, and 30 years after his death, Lesley discovered and edited the material into the film we present to you in this episode. So Lesley, how are you feeling today?
Good. How are you guys?
Great.
Good, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. We want to congratulate you first and foremost for having won the Golden Bear for Best Short Film at this year's Berlinale. So it's truly deserved because me personally, I really loved how you really nurtured the images conserved by Lloyd about what is essentially his last days, but with this unique perspective. Because on the one hand, for sure, you have these unfinished recordings of him, but it's not just about the unfinished recordings of what was his living the disease, which in themselves are fascinating because they portray his courage in facing the disease, not only through the physical pain that he took, but also, of course, his critical judgment of the situation, all the social and political implications that had connected to it. Added to that, what you have is this unique perspective of those who remained after his death that you really imprint in the film, as these ghostly written messages that gives us a sort of an insight into the emotional struggle of Lloyd at the time, the man, the artist. And it's something that is not filmed, but we do read, and is as if a secret unfilmed and undisclosed, I found. So naturally, the first question we have is, how did the project come to you, and what were your first ideas in approaching it and realizing its structure, given that it was, as the title says, unfinished?
Thank you so much. I guess the starting point for me was I received an email from John Grayson, who was my professor like 15, 20 years ago, a film school professor. And we've kept in touch over the years. And he emailed me, and he had CC'd a number of other folks on the email. Some I knew, some I didn't know. But basically, later I realized these were all artists, filmmakers, researchers, scholars who had been involved in this television show called Toronto Living with AIDS. And so John basically emailed me this like really kind of strange and enthusiastic email saying, we've just discovered the long lost autobiographical footage that Lloyd was shooting for Toronto Living with AIDS, and we'd love for you to work on some sort of restoration of it. Like, to be honest, I was really terrified when I got the email, because I didn't know who Lloyd Wong was. I didn't know a lot of like the people that were CC'd on it. And I, like, I love John, I trust John and everything, but it was just this like
Of course.
strange message to receive. But he had sent me like links to the footage that had just been digitized. And I watched it, and I was just so drawn to the footage. I mean, like, you saw the footage too, right? Like, it's somehow like, I was like, what is this feeling of being so connected to somebody watching it, but also so disconnected, like disconnected through time, through experience, like through so many ways. Yeah, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm terrified, but I feel like I want to, yeah, I just want to keep learning. I just want to know more. Um, and like, of course, with any, like, the more you want to know, the less you know. The more time I spent with it, I was like, oh, this is more of a mystery to me.
Mm-hmm.
Him as a person, but I learned so much about the time period, and like socially, culturally, what was going on. But Lloyd Wong as a person, I feel like, yeah, he's just so beautiful, but also sort of like unknowable.
Yeah, yeah, still a mystery. Yes, that an interesting question. Did you ever think why? I mean, I'm sure that you know how to respond to this, but what did your teacher initially thought? Because what was at the root of his email to you? Like, what was behind his choice of you making the film? What he saw in you that I thought she will have an amazing perspective over this.
I don't know. You would have to ask John.
Yeah.
But I mean, like for the first year. So I think he asked me to do it, but he also set me up in a way to help me work through it. So he invited me to join this residency called Viral Interventions, which is for artists and communities to make new films about living with AIDS. And
Hmm.
so I was basically for a whole year was working with other artists who were also making their own AIDS videos. Yeah, like a lot of my questions, my doubts were really, I think, like nurtured through the group, and they were all through their own as well. So I really feel like, I mean, now, like it's been like 4 years, I realized like it was such a community effort in a way that I didn't realize like I was part of this community, but I definitely was and still am. And we've all evolved together through working on the project. Yeah, for the first year, I was also wondering like, why did he pick me? And I was really mad at the time. I was like, why did he make me do this? But I think there's these sort of ways that you realize like that's not even the point. Like that's not the question.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just so honored to even be asked, like, at a certain point, I was like, it's a gift. Like, why am I being such a brat about it?
Yeah, of
You
course.
know?
Well, but what's interesting about it is that, despite whatever differences may be, whatever new, kind of new features a reality that is different to us may bring, it's all about human connection and what we all go through together. So I think that's what the beauty of cinema can bring when we may be distant from a certain reality. That's very interesting. And also another question kind of pops up from your words is, I'm very intrigued because I myself don't know. And I'm very curious if you did learn this through the process. Did you came to understand how the treatment of AIDS changed from the 90s, 80s, 90s to what it is today now? Because I'm sure it has evolved and it's a lot more better than it was then, but I myself don't know in particular what is the treatment today, but it would be interesting to talk about.
That's one of the things that I was so curious about, like watching Lloyd, like the main center of the film is him demonstrating how to prepare the IV treatment for Foscarnet. And this was like educating the public was something that was very important to him. This show was meant, like that segment was meant to be on television. And like I mentioned, it was meant to be on Toronto Living with AIDS, which was like a weekly community-driven television show to show what it was like to live with AIDS across different cultural communities in Toronto. At the time, like people of color and women were rarely shown as people living with AIDS in mainstream television. So Lloyd was really trying to challenge us, and Toronto Living with AIDS was really trying to challenge us. And a lot of because AIDS wasn't recognized, like during the AIDS crisis, it wasn't recognized or really dealt with seriously in the in healthcare. Self, sort of like self-reliance and
Hmm.
self-autonomy really important, and like educating the public and sharing knowledge about treatment was really important. A lot of folks were telling me like that I interviewed that even when they went to the hospital, they would experience prejudice and discrimination, like they
Oh.
didn't want to be treated because they were afraid, like the healthcare workers were afraid that they would contract AIDS. And so a lot of people living with AIDS were really kind of like sharing amongst each other different types of treatment. That's why like him doing this demo is just so powerful because he's trying to show something that was hidden. He was
Yeah.
trying to something and share knowledge in a way that was like being suppressed. Yeah, that particular time period. Now, like there's still stigma, but I think the way that healthcare systems in Canada are treating HIV are very different. And that's why I think this clip is so, just such someone was saying it's like message in a bottle,
All right. Yeah.
Like he made it and then he wanted it to be like cast out there and we've received it now. We can open it and it's like a little pocket of that time he was living in. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, and that's a very interesting moment in the film. I think it's, I would even say, iconic of the film in the sense that it represents the film as a whole. I initially thought that you were the one who kind of composed it, but by your words as you described it, I think it was him. It was part of his sort of work of art, so to speak. You know, his experimentation with the images, and. I want to ask you further, how do you interpret that split screen aspect as a narrative device to portray his experience and of his community as a whole? What did you, when you saw it for the first time, what was your thoughts, your reactions?
So he was the one who composited everything with like the green screen or blue screen. Like so the foreground and background strategy was something that he like when I received the footage, it was already done. And like to receive that is just it was so brilliant and mind blowing. And I think I was really taken by the way he did that in the in the demo with the cooking show, but he also did it with his talking head. He put like a pool hall behind him, or he was, he put himself in and out of all these contexts just to
Uh-huh.
show us like what is normally hidden, I'm going to put it into the public, or what is normally not talked about, I'm going to contrast it with, this cooking show that's always on TV, or like these commercials that are always on TV, showing the different bodies that are basically like normative and like accepted and desired. Because he was always doing this like foreground background, I decided to put the split screen because what would it mean for us to see him, beside himself instead of in relation to
Right.
others? Like he was always being othered, you know? So I think by creating the split screen, it was like this other direction. So like he was always doing this. And then so I was like, what would happen if we put him beside himself?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think there were a lot of surprises like when that happened. Like when you put footage like side by side, there's always these like strange coincidences and timings of things where there's like this synchronicity that happens. Yeah, I also think, when he took off his shirt, you see the scar on his body. And I think like that Super 8 footage really showed like a different side of it where he's not presenting himself in a very formal way. In the Super 8, it's much more like home movie, it's much more raw. And I think that contrast allows us to see creates a more complex understanding of him. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's sort of the climax of that sequence, so to speak. You're not expecting because me, as I interpret it, is as if the left screen is sort of the more pristine, calm figure of him, as if born out of an ad himself, with as he crosses that ad world in that left screen, and he's trying to put security in a hope for a queer audience in the system, in the healthcare, so to speak. And on the other side, there is the opposite, which it's a very grim reality of him laying in a hospital bed connected to that same medical device he's explaining, but he's in pain and it doesn't seem to be very much hope. So there is this contrasting feeling that you achieve with the split screen as well, where inevitably we want to put hope in the system and try to fight the disease as much as we can, but especially at the time it would be very difficult, almost impossible, because death would be an impending doom. So yeah, it creates this complex dialogue, and I think it really invites the audience to see it. It's I think it really speaks to one of the lines that I think it was very interesting that you put kind of what people told you to investigate with this film in one of those little moments, like try to do this, try to do that, and it made it very personal because we invited ourselves as well as a character with a point of view, and I think one of them was speak about him and to him. So the split screen I think is kind of that embodiment, which is really cool.
I mean, to continue, because this sequence is very interesting, and so I think we can expand even more on it, because the presence of these images, as you mentioned, from other forms of media, the cooking show, there's also the bodybuilder in the background, these images of from ads and things like that. I think uh, are fascinating because the film is very haunting, but there's also a humorous side to it. I think it shows a bit of Lloyd's sense of humor, which I think is very, very interesting. And so I'd like to ask you, how do you interpret like that juxtaposition that he was clearly thinking about throughout that sequence. And so what you see in it, but also what do you think Lloyd saw in it and what he was trying to do with it?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. There's this way that he's bringing in this like it's funny, but it's also odd and it's very poignant and it's also just very cutting, like critically. And I think that's why he's such a brilliant artist because the images don't really say one thing. They're saying so many things at the same time. Um, and I think that's also why we can keep coming back to it over and over again, because every time, I think that's also why this foreground, background, and side by side, like there's so many, you can go this way, you can also go this way, you can go this way. The juxtapositions are so like multiple and kaleidoscopic. I think he was trying to show us that there's always this comparison that's happening with bodies, with images of bodies, with representation. And like it is very much about self-representation. I feel like when I watch it now, I just can't believe like we really take for granted now that we can represent ourselves like so easily compared to at that time. And there's a really great book called Toronto Living with AIDS that's edited by Ryan Conrad. And he talked about how a lot of this AIDS activism work was done during a time where people were just using like consumer grade video technology, right? They really put their bodies on the line to try to change the world and how the world saw AIDS and how they saw people living with AIDS. So I think like that putting himself in relation to other bodies is really kind of like the essential key of the footage. And he was also he made two other works that I really was inspired by. One is called My Bedroom, where he basically drives back to where he grew up, which was he was raised in a Chinese restaurant. He just basically like he's carrying the you don't see him the whole time. He's just it's his POV going through the apartment behind the Chinese restaurant, talking about what it was like growing up in there. And the other piece was called Mirror Mirror, and it's him and his roommate talking about the first time they ever went to China and what it was like to think about their Chineseness in relation to their travels. And I think like those two works, which were from the 80s, were really strong works of self-representation. And self-representation in the 80s, being like a Chinese Canadian, was something that was quite radical. So yeah, I think it's that piece of like this is who I am. This is me wanting to show you what I think of myself. Yeah, I think that's what that sort of like juxtaposition was always about, is like this is who I am in relation to how others have seen me.
Yeah. And also, like, what was, I think you already touched a bit on it, but what was the most challenging part of this project? Because I imagine there were some practical challenges in terms of there's this footage that you have to parse through and see the connections and see and think about it profoundly, but also like an emotional challenge because there's a responsibility here that is quite, there's a weight to it. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that I thought about constantly and still do, like even more so now that the film is out there, because I was really concerned about how to show him with dignity. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to use the split screen, because I think one of the parts that I had a lot of difficulty with was the hospital scene where his bandage is being changed, and it's like very difficult to watch that. Um, and a way for me to sort of handle it carefully was to put the split screen so that people could look away if they wanted to. There's this way that it's sort of, when you look away, you still know it's there. And I think like a main key for me is like to really think of ourselves as witnesses. So to witness, to bear witness is to not look away, right? And like for so long, Lloyd and other people living with AIDS like have been like people have looked away. So what does it mean for us 30 years later to now come together, like all of us here? How do we bear witness together? And even when images are really difficult, is there a way that we can, I don't want to force people to look at something they don't want to look at, right? If it's hard for you, like that's okay. You can sort of look away, you can close your eyes, but you know it's still there. And I purposely sort of left, like in editing, made sure people knew that the bandage was going to come off soon. Like I didn't want it to be like surprise. So, it's like, something's going to happen soon and you can prepare yourself if you need to look away or to close your eyes or whatever. But also, like, if you are going to look away, you should know that it's there. Like, it's still there. You're just not looking at it. So this idea of like bearing witness together and a sort of like intergenerational witnessing was really key. And I think that sort of emotional burden is never going to go away. Like it's always going to be there. And that's kind of like, that's what it feels like to know, you know, to know that there are painful things and struggles, but also to show his resilience and his courage and determination.
So at around the 4 minute mark, we see a clip of a woman, I presume Sui Wong, according to the credits. She's inserting a cassette and watching an interview of Lloyd on a TV. This happens not just once, as if you intentionally showed both takes that had been recorded, and I thought it was a nice counterpoint to the idea of staging in documentaries, because even though it's real life, there are always stage moments and gestures like these in documentaries. And so through seeing both, we are reminded of the staging, but because it also feels the realness and the unadulterated nature of the documentary. And so, yeah, this was a bit of my reflection on the moment, but my question was your thoughts behind seeing this moment repeated.
Oh yeah, I really like how you talked about his staging. I didn't think about it in that way, but that's so astute. So this kind of goes back to Tomás's question in the beginning, like you asked me like what was sort of the process. Like when I first received the footage, I thought I was supposed to finish it. Like I thought like, oh, they given me this like footage, they want me to finish it. And so I sort of approached it where I was like going through and looking for like the best take, you know. But I realized, I mean, you're all filmmakers, so you know what I mean, like you edit as well, right? So like you receive all these takes and you're supposed to pick, what is supposed to be the best take. But I realized like I had no idea what the best take meant because there was no director. Like if I was treating myself as an editor, I would try all these ways to like kind of like talk to Lloyd and ask him like, oh, is this the best take you want? Like I went through so many weird like I was like method editing where I would like dress up like him and put on glasses like him.
Oh, wow.
Like look in the mirror and be like, which is the best, like which is the take you want? Like this is the one I think. What do you think? And then I was like, oh my God, I'm just talking to myself in the mirror. This is insane. But like there was all these ways I was trying to like connect with him. Like, what is it that you really want? Because I'm gonna finish this. And then I realized like that's, after a long time, I realized like that's not what this is about. It's not about finishing it because it's the fact that it's unfinished is the essence of the project. And it's never going to be finished because like remembering someone is never finished. And really this is about remembering a person, remembering a time. Um, and so like I think, like that experience of watching multiple takes was really like it really hit me because you're sort of watching someone trying something over and over again and they're trying to get to a point. We don't know what that point is, right? Like a lot of times, like if you do like 5 takes, it's not even the fifth take, the one that you choose. Like maybe it's the third take. So like I couldn't even assume that like the last take was like the best take. And I think like I sort of leaned into this experience of like watching the repetition and trying like trying to figure out what they were aiming for. And then kind of coming to an understanding that I will never know. It's that unknowability that was something that I realized I had to sit with. There's something about watching multiple takes that is very disturbing. Like, like because it's not something that you would normally we're only supposed to pick the one take and then you move on. Like you're sewing together this like narrative. And so I think like I wanted to share that feeling of being disturbed of what a movie is supposed to feel like. And we can all make our own choices. Like, I think my sort of like dream is that other people will get interested in the footage and make their own versions because I'm not trying to make a definitive, like the definitive story of Lloyd Wong. I'm not trying to be an authority or an expert on him because I don't think anyone is an expert on anybody. So yeah, there's something about like the multiple takes is says so much about like being a human that's trying to create and say something, you know.
Yeah, that's very interesting because yeah, I mean we're talking about real life, so it's even kind of strange to think about what it means to repeat something when in theory we're just watching someone real do something. So it's always interesting to think about what exactly were they trying to say.
And that was
Um,
his mother. So you mentioned like the woman.
okay.
So
Oh,
I found out like that was his mother. Which yeah, also to myself, I was like, oh my God, that's his mother. And so I for the longest time I was like trying to figure out who she was. I thought it was his grandmother for a while, but then I realized it was his mother. And I ended up connecting with the language assistant on the film shoot who said, yeah, that was his mother. And he said, I was so surprised because she was so supportive of him. And he was shocked. He himself was Chinese. And he said, I was just assumed like a Chinese mom would be like not supportive of the son. But she was very kind and yeah, you know, cared for him like till the very end. And I tried to go find her, but on my way there, um, I mean, like the whole time I've just been kind of like the methodology of the project was like I would talk to one person and at the end I would say, who do you want me to talk to next? Who do you think I should talk to next? And so I
right.
kept like the circle very small in that way because I was only talking to the person that like another person told me to talk to, which is kind of like the logic of like gossip, like the small community, right? Like I didn't want to
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to like get like the full picture of Lloyd Wong. But no one ever like said that I should speak to the family. So I was really nervous because I didn't know if like they knew that he was like making this film. Like I don't know the relationship. And I did know like from his movie that he made where he goes back home that he left home when he was 17. When I was pretty much like close to finished working on the project, one of my mentors, Richard Fung, was like, I think you should reach out to the family, which was like breaking the logic of like the project, but I was like, it has
Yeah.
to be done. Um, and so he had Googled like the family restaurant, and on the website it said that she was still alive and that she was like 90s, and she still like went to the restaurant every day and like oversaw the kitchen. It's like about 40 minutes from my home. So like I started driving there and I was like, I'm gonna tell her like I've been working on this project and she's in it and like is she okay that she's in it? And I wanted to show her and everything. Like I was exactly like halfway there driving, and then my sister called me and she's like, where are you going? And I told her I'm gonna go talk to Lloyd Wong's mother. And she's like, oh, your mother. She's like, what's like, she's like, why are you going to do that? And then like within 15 seconds, she's like, oh, I just Googled it. She's gone, like she's dead.
No. Jesus. Oh God, I did not expect that. I was so enthralled. I
I
thought you were
know.
going to meet her.
And I was like shocked because I mean like on the internet it had said that she like on the restaurant website it said that she was still alive. And the thing is like I didn't even think to Google her because like
Hmm.
I just heard from Richard that she was still, and I looked it up and like throughout the project, I didn't Google anything. Like it was like my whole approach was like person to person. Um and it was like through phone or through like in person. So I kind of felt really stupid when my sister, like, you're like within, she's like, yeah, the internet exists, right? Like you can, and and I was so sad. And she was like, do you want me to read you the obituary? So like I pulled over like on the side of the highway and she like read me the obituary and it said like, she had passed away, in, um, 2020 and, that she was now reunited with her husband and her son, Lloyd Wong. And,
Right.
um, and yeah, like it was very, like, it was just so strange. And like, and I said to my sister, like, she's like, I guess you don't have to go now. And I was like, no, I'm still gonna go. Like, I kind of at that point started to realize like I could still find her if I went, like, because I was trying to, connect with Lloyd like for like over 4 years. And like, you don't have to be talking to someone physically, like a physical person. To me, I was just like, I can maybe still try to find something if I went there. Yeah, so it was like very, it was a very strange ending.
That story is amazing. I have to say, like I was completely out of my, you know, it's like you went and met her in the unfinished world, so to speak. That was what I kept thinking. You went and met her in the unfinished world. I just kept imagining you went into that restaurant and did you eat there? Just kind of my now it's just my curiosity spinning the wheel. But you just stay there. What happened?
I went there. It was very odd because I realized I was replicating the same experience of that video I was telling you about where he drives home to the restaurant. And like as I was driving in, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing the exact same shot that he did where he drives into the parking
All
lot
right.
of the restaurant. It was very like strange, this sort of doubling that was happening. And I went and I did end up speaking to a family member, but she was very like she was very kind and respectful. But I think she also, I mean, she said to me, like Lloyd's been gone for a long time now, and we don't know anything about this film. And she kind of closed
Mhm.
um
Was the
the door
chapter.
very, yeah,
Right.
very gently. And also I felt very bad going. Like I felt like it was a very difficult thing that I just placed in front of her. And she was so kind. Like I'm just so grateful that she was open to like even speaking to me. But I definitely knew that it was not like a place that I needed to push, you know?
Right.
Um,
Correct. Okay.
And I think it was like one of those moments where you realize like sometimes you're this messenger of something difficult and you're not doing it because if it's going to feel good, but you have to share difficult news. And I kind of feel like that's kind of what like a recurring theme, for me, like working on the film. It's like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to share difficult um, experiences, and that's part of life.
So your use of the written word to convey information on Lloyd is interesting. Often it's just the blue words against the green screen, and without voiceovers. And it's definitely worth noting that with only written words, it's a much ghostlier film, as if no voice was alive to give us this information. And all the words, all the spoken words are left to Lloyd. So was this your thought process regarding the manner of conveying the information on Lloyd?
Yeah, I was really trying not to impose too much of myself. Like originally I didn't have any of my notes in it, and it was like just all of it. Like I really wanted people to experience what it was like to watch his footage. Um, but I also realized like I wanted to show how limited I was. Like the notes are really to show that it's just like these little fragments or shards. It's not I'm not trying to be a biographer, and I'm not a historian, and I'm not like an archivist, and like I was saying in the beginning, like a lot of the time at the initial stages, I was like, who am I to him? I'm just a stranger. I'm just a stranger, but I care so much about him. And I honestly, like by the end, I was like, I love him so much, but it's this very odd, like, distance between us as well. So for me, like, the writing was for me to also share my experience as a person who's trying to figure things out and also not really landing on anything that would fix him. Um, I really tried to make the notes sort of open things up even more. And that's why it's this sort of like more of a like expansive, like kind of a way to, like a poem, And like that's why I also chose like the green and the blue because like again this inspired by his like green screen technique. He was always like changing his background, right? And like that was very resonant with me when I was talking to people in his life. Like everyone would tell me like completely different stories about him, which would change my view on him. And sometimes the stories would be contradictory, which is also very human. Like all of us have like contradictions. So I thought like green is a way for me to keep his background open. None of us should walk away from this thinking that we like truly know him. But at the same time, we do feel like we do know him in a way. And that's sort of strange, like knowing and not knowing for me, like, is what green screen and blue screen, like, that's why it's like green and blue. Colors are about this possibility of more, this possibility of change. Yeah, that was something, the text, but also the colors we're trying to create. Yeah, a sort of more generous view of a person instead of like locking it.
I was wondering as well, I don't know if you can share the stories themselves, but I was just curious, what contradictions did you find amongst those stories that friends have shared with you?
I mean, there was even just a lot of I think I've said I used Ian Iqbal Rashid's interview notes from his interview. Like he was saying this footage wasn't even for that film. Like the whole time I had like, thinking that this was for Toronto Living with AIDS, and he said, like some of this isn't even for that. And I think when Ian said that, like I was really I was shocked because I had been for years thinking it was like for a particular context. But then, after I sat with his thought, I was like, it doesn't really matter. like, like,
Mhm.
like the things that matter start to not matter, and
Hmm
like
hmm
even when I was talking to like the historian, I was really caught up on like biographical details. And then after a while, I realized like those aren't the things that really matter to me in this project. They are important, right? Like facts are important, but I think like it made me realize like what I'm trying to get at with the film is something beyond that. Like it's much more um it's not tangible. Um not about like that specific date that he died, which like I was obsessed with finding for a while. But then like once you find it, like then what, And like there's lots of people, like even in my own family, like we don't know what their real like birthday is. Like that's just like this idea of like a birthday and having an official birthday like on your ID is like official knowledge. And I think like what would happen if we sort of prioritize and valued like non-official knowledges.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because it's kind of an analogy to the sort of documentarian journey where the longer you spend with a project, kind of detach yourself from the more trivial details more easily, and you really get to the essence of what you want to do, and you feel much freer to do it confidently, I think. So it's interesting to see that progression as well with how you're describing it. Yeah.
And it's interesting how cinema at large, even in both in documentary and fiction, there's this, what it is, it's an artful representation of reality. So even when there is this determination to try and find the facts, when you have films who delve into research, in the end, the construction of the narrative structure, dramatically speaking, there's always adaptation, reformation, creative liberties taken. So in the end, what we're seeking is some kind of verisimilitude, let's say, an approximation to reality. And you spoke to the core because evidently that little sequence, which is, of course, iconic and represents the film, despite not having been made for the TV episode, it very much lives in the same realm of mood and for who is for in terms of an audience. Yeah. And as a final question, really want to ask you, what is the festival run looking for Lloyd Wong Unfinished, and when can our listeners expect to see it either publicly or streaming eventually? Any ideas?
Well, the film is distributed to festivals by Square Eyes, and the film is distributed to like educational institutions and galleries and art institutions through V-Tape. So I'm sort of, yeah, I'm sort of taking a step back with
Mm-hmm.
that aspect. But I mean, I'm also just sharing it. Like I'm just sharing links with you. Like I think people are very protective of their films, but I'm not because I feel like I inherited, like I kind of see this, the footage was like a queer inheritance, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I inherited from the community, like I don't own it. And like I worked on this, but I just really want to share it and have people hear and see Lloyd. Um, so yeah, I'm also just when people just reach out to me, I also just send links. I know I'm not supposed to, but I think that's the beauty of it is like to break that sort of protectiveness. Like I'm not possessive,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Definitely makes sense, especially in such a project as it is Lloyd Wang, of course, of course. And yeah, I mean, I think it would also be a great note to finish off if we asked you if you know how can people see Lloyd Wang's work? Because even on either online or just publicly, is it on any exhibition? Could it be seen? Where can people find it?
So the original footage that was passed to me, it was um the footage was kept in Lloyd Wong's friend's home, Richard Fung, who's a filmmaker, AIDS activist. He's the one who had all the footage in a box for like 30 years in his home. And he brought it into the Queer Archives in Toronto. And this is like the largest independent archive for queer materials. And the footage is there. And it was Ryan Conrad, the historian I mentioned earlier, who actually found it in the Queer Archives and brought it out and digitized it. So it's still all there at the Queer Archives. Like people should go check it out. And yeah, and Lloyd's other films as well, I think are now available at V-Tape.
All
Yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah, I think it's also important to see his finished work as well, because that was that definitely for me, like I learned so much about him in the time period.
And that was the latest from Lesley Loksi Chan, folks. We would like to thank her presence here today. She's truly an excellent filmmaker, and remember to check out Lloyd Wong Unfinished once out on streaming platforms. Or you can always send a direct message to Lesley herself to see if she can send you a link. If you're a filmmaker running the festival marathon, feel free to send us a message for an interview as well. We would love to promote your work. Don't forget to subscribe, share this interview, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. And if you're on YouTube and want to see more interviews like this, check out this next video right here. Thank you for listening and see you next time.